We're going to do a three-course lunch today. We are making a mushroom tartine. We're making a roasted salmon with polenta and shaved apple, dill salad, a little bit of a pan sauce of whole grain mustard and capers. And then Aisha, our pastry chef, is going to be doing a delicious olive oil cake. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with the mushroom tartine. I love tartines. Tartines are the French version of a crostini. And so a tartine is essentially an open-faced sandwich. It's great for entertaining. It's great for a nice light snack. It's great for a meal if you want to remove a little bit of the carbs from it and just do one slice of bread on the bottom. But you can get really versatile with it versus a traditional sandwich because it's only on one piece of bread. So you can get away with a little bit more. And so we're going to use a lot of products you can find at Baker's Daughter for this tartine. The basis of the tartine is going to be our house-made herb focaccia. So we sell this in our bread section, and I'm going to show you how we can slice this, turn this into these little crostinis or tartines, and then from there we're going to build it up with a lot of flavors. At Baker's Daughter, we do our own version of Boursin cheese, which is a seasoned goat cheese that has lemon zest, garlic, thyme, parsley, chives. We're going to spread that on the bottom. We're going to do some roasted mushrooms. We're going to do Baker's Daughter pickled red onions, and then we have a beautiful white truffle honey, and then Parmesan cheese that we're going to grate on top. So we're going to go ahead and start off with our crostinis. We're going to take our focaccia, and we're going to cut these into about 3 centimeter thick strips. We're going to go the long ways because you want to have a good amount of surface area when you build up your tartine. And this is a great application for any type of old bread you have at home. Old baguette, you can cut it long ways on a bias. Any type of country loaf that you have, like any type of like a French bread, sourdough bread, this is a really good use for it. So my saute pan, I got it over about medium-high heat. It doesn't need to be hot straight away, so we're just gonna add this in, our bread. And we're gonna let that kind of toast. So we're gonna cook this for about 30 seconds. At the end of 30 seconds, we're gonna add a little bit of butter to this pan. Butter is gonna give a little bit of color to the tartine or the crostini. It's also gonna give a good amount of flavor to it. But you can always omit it. If you wanna do this in the oven with just olive oil, you could do that. I like to do it on the stove. I think that you get a more even cooking. I also think that when you cook the crostinis or the tartines in a pan, the oil tends to absorb into the bread a little bit more, meaning it's gonna be less dry and a little more flavorful. So I can see the bread starting to toast a little bit. So at this point, I'm gonna add in my butter. We're not gonna do a lot, we're just gonna do a little knob. And then we're gonna swirl this around. And we just wanna get the butter to be kind of frothy. You'll see, we're gonna talk about this also when we do the salmon. You'll see the butter starts to froth up in the side of the pans. That's a good thing. That's what's happening when it froths up like that is the milk solids in the butter are actually caramelizing, and it's bringing out all those flavors. And the caramelized milk solids actually create a nutty flavor to the butter. And so that nuttiness, the caramelization also adds color to our bread. So we're gonna season with a little bit of salt and pepper. Looks great, nice golden brown. So I'm gonna get my plate ready because we're gonna put these guys right on the plate. While this is happening, what we did was, at Baker's Daughter, we sell a lot of different dried mushrooms. We have dried black trumpet mushrooms, chanterelle mushrooms, morel mushrooms. And so we're gonna do a mixture of fresh mushrooms and then dried mushrooms. The reason I'm showcasing the dried mushrooms is because the mushrooms that we have that are dried are generally seasonal mushrooms that you can only get certain seasons. And so we're gonna do a dried chanterelle. Chanterelle season is gonna be 2 seasons. It's gonna be late spring and then early fall. So we're gonna take these, we hydrated these in a little bit of warm water. What that does is it reconstitutes the dried mushroom to bring them back to life a little bit so they're not dry, they're not woody. They actually feel just like kind of like a spongy mushroom. And I'm just gonna do like kind of a rough chop through them. And then I'm gonna get my pan ready again. Hey Liz. I'm gonna clean my pan out so we can just use one pan. Heat goes back on. A little bit of olive oil. And then I'm gonna do shaved garlic. If you have a mandolin, you could use a mandolin. For me, I'm just gonna do this by hand. So we want to do, I call it Goodfellas style garlic. So nice, thin shaved. If you have a razor blade at home and you want to get crazy with it, you can do that also. Just like Polly did in the slammer. So garlic goes in. While that's happening, I'm going to go ahead and chop up the other mushrooms. We're going to use a cremini and a hint of the woods. Creminis, we're just going to take the bottoms off. I'm just going to cut these in half. And then once I cut them in half, I'm going to then kind of quarter them up. If they're bigger, obviously you want to make sure that all the mushrooms are of comparable size. So obviously quartering this versus quartering this doesn't really make sense. So we're going to cut this probably into eighths to make sure that they're of comparable size of the rest of the mushrooms. And then the hint of the woods mushrooms, these are beautiful. These are also referred to as maitake mushrooms. So they're a little cluster, really leafy on the top. We like to fry these at Gravitas. They really take well to frying and roasting and have a really nice texture to them. You can also marinate these and grill these. Our sous chef, Doug, has done these before as a taco, marinating these and then grilling them and charring them and keeping them whole. And by keeping them whole, it actually has a really strong meaty texture to them. And so we're gonna actually peel these into these little shavings and shards, if you will. So just kind of breaking them up. And remember, all this is gonna lay on a open-faced crostini. So we want to be mindful that everything is cut to a way that's indicative and conducive to having everything rest on that tartine. So you don't want anything bulky, anything too heavy. Okay, mushrooms are gonna go right in. Anytime you cook mushrooms in a saute pan, you wanna have that pan really hot. Mushrooms have a lot of water content in them. And the idea is that we wanna get that water out, and we don't want soggy mushrooms, we want nice sauteed, golden brown, caramelized mushrooms. Only way to achieve that is hot pan. So we're gonna pick this up a little bit. While this is happening, I'm gonna take rosemary and thyme. I'm gonna clean this from the stem, and we're gonna chop this because this is gonna garnish our mushrooms at the end. Already the mushrooms smell great, the garlic smells great, and then we're just gonna saute this. I'm moving the pan a lot because the pan is drying out a little bit. And so you just want to keep the mushrooms moving so they don't burn anywhere. I'm going to turn my pan down a little bit. And then I'm almost done cleaning my thyme. And so my thyme and rosemary have been cleaned. I'm going to run my knife through them. And then once my knife has gone through these, I'm going to then put them right into the pan. The pan's getting a touch dry, so I'm just gonna add a touch of water to the pan. And then I'm gonna add a knob of butter. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and turn my heat down. And then notice I haven't seasoned the mushrooms yet. Because I talked about the water content of mushrooms being very high, you wanna make sure that you don't season the mushrooms until the very end of the cooking. The reason being is that salt has a tendency to sometimes release water from the mushrooms, and we want to make sure we're doing that at the very end after mushrooms have caramelized and got a nice color on them. Mushrooms also, because of the water content, have a tendency to reduce in size as they cook. So also when you season mushrooms at the beginning, it might look like a large volume of mushrooms, so you want to maybe you season aggressively, but then at the end of it, the mushrooms cook down and they're much smaller in volume than what you started with. So you have ability to maybe sometimes over-season the mushrooms by doing it that way. So I turn my pan off. I'm gonna taste the mushrooms because you have to taste everything. More salt. delicious. So Boursin, traditional cheese you can find at the grocery store. We do our own variation at Baker's Daughter. It's softened goat cheese with a little bit of creme fraiche, thyme, chives, parsley, lemon zest, lemon juice. And we're just gonna put it on the tartine. And we're gonna be pretty generous with this. I'm a sandwich fanatic. I love sandwiches. And one of my biggest tips I tell people all the time is you gotta go crust to crust. You gotta go sideline to sideline, if you will. And so you really gotta make sure that the coverage of your condiments and your ingredients on a sandwich are equal and spread all throughout. So that's what we're looking for, a nice generous amount of Boursin on there. So I'm gonna take the rest of this here. If you had an offset spatula, that would also help. I'm just using a spoon. Okay, so that's now built. So this is our bed for our tartine. I have my delicious mushrooms here. So I'm gonna spoon these on. And we wanna make sure that as we're putting the mushrooms on here, we're giving a variety of the chanterelles, the hint of the woods, and the creminis. We're kind of mixing it up so that you get a little bit of each in each bite. We don't want to overload this because this is an open-faced sandwich and it needs to be fairly easy to eat. And we want to make sure we get a good amount of coverage. And then from here, we can have a lot of fun with this because mushrooms and goat cheese are a great combination already, but it gives you a lot of abilities to then be able to add a lot of flavor enhancers is what I call them. So I call pickles and condiments flavor enhancers for dishes. So at this point, we're gonna add in some pickled red onions, just a couple of pieces. This is gonna add some sweetness and acidity to the tartine. That's gonna play off nicely with the creamy goat cheese. We're then gonna do some beautiful white truffle honey. White truffle honey is great for a cheese plate. It's great for I love it with mushrooms. And we're just gonna kind of drizzle a little bit. And because the mushrooms are actually hot, the smell of the truffles coming off of this as I put it on is just super intense and delicious. So just a little bit drizzled on top. And then to finish this, some Parmigiano Reggiano that we are going to grate over the top and do make it rain a little cheese overhead. And we want to be pretty generous. Same thing, going crust to crust, side to side, making sure there's coverage of everything. You could go back and garnish this with like chives if you wanted to, or parsley, but I think that looks pretty killer. So your first course is complete, and this is gonna be a roasted mushroom tartine with focaccia, Boursin, pickled red onions, truffle honey, and Parmesan cheese. So we're gonna jump into we're gonna do seared salmon. I love skin on salmon. I know not everyone's a fan or proponent of skin on salmon. I think in terms of fish, easily some of the most flavorful fish in terms of skin being on it. Salmon has a very high fat content, and that skin has a lot of connective tissue with fat in it. So when you sear the skin and get it crispy, it activates a lot of that fat. It actually helps to really kind of, I don't want to say the word lubricate, but it actually helps to kind of glisten the fish and really activate the fat to really make it really delicious. So we're gonna keep the skin on this. I encourage you all to try salmon with skin on. If not, the way we cook it is very easy to remove it after we cook it. So to begin, we're gonna make our polenta. And this can be made in advance. If you're making this for dinner, you can easily make this an hour or two before your dinner starts. And we're gonna start with our pot. And polenta is gonna be a ground cornmeal from Italy. It's not too finely coursed ground. It's not as finely ground as, say, a semolina for a pasta dough. It has some texture to it. And so we're gonna do the polenta with milk and chicken stock. So I'm gonna bring all this to a simmer. We're gonna also add into here some garlic that we're gonna microplane into it. I'm gonna put a bay leaf in here just for a little bit of flavor. I really like to microplane garlic into sauces, vinaigrettes. It's just a really subtle way of adding flavor to a dish. And then you don't get left with the garlic at the end. So we're just gonna do one garlic clove microplaned. That's gonna come to a simmer. When this is simmering, we're gonna add in our polenta. We're gonna whisk, and then the polenta is gonna get finished with pecorino, cheese, with a little bit of creme fraiche. If you have mascarpone, mascarpone is easily substitutable for it also. If you have any other types of cheeses other than pecorino, you can use that also. Parmesan, goat cheese, fontina. These are all cheeses that would work really well. And then to go with this, we're gonna do a apple, red onion, dill, parsley salad with a ramp vinegar. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut my ingredients for my salad. So we have a Granny Smith apple and we have a Fuji apple. I'm gonna do this by hand. If you have a mandolin, it also helps, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut this into kind of like these planks. And then from there, we're gonna do matchsticks. So I'm gonna keep the skin on because we're not gonna have much of the skin. But a good tip is if you're gonna be cutting it long ways and you're worried about the stability of an apple, if you just come to the bottom and just trim the bottom off, it stands up easily, gives you a nice little base to work from. So from here, I'm just gonna do really thin, kind of like 2 centimeter thick slices. The first one with the skin comes off and gets discarded. And we're gonna work our way around the core. So we're now gonna repeat with a Fuji apple. Same thing. And we're now gonna cut these into the matchsticks that I referred to. So matchsticks are just gonna be kind of like a julienne cut, but of an apple, about yay big. So we're gonna cut these. That's gonna go into our mixing bowl. I can smell my garlic starting to cook. The liquid is now simmering. So this is our chicken stock and our milk. So I'm gonna go ahead and whisk in my polenta. You don't need to actively whisk this too much. We're gonna turn our heat down now. And then same thing, we're gonna season this at the end. We're gonna put all of our flavors in here. We're gonna get the cheese in there. We're gonna get the creme fraiche in there. And then at the very end, we'll go ahead and season it. But it already smells really, really good. Like that garlic and the chicken stock have really opened up nicely. So you'll see here, we're now at a pretty, I'd say semi-thickened state. So at this point, I'm actually just gonna turn my heat down. And the polenta is fairly cooked at this point. So I'm gonna go ahead and add in my cheese. Cheese also is gonna dictate how thick your polenta is. So how rich it is, how thick it is, you're in control of it. So if you want it to be thicker and richer, add a richer cheese, add more cheese. If you want it to be nice and light, maybe don't add any cheese at all. Creme fraiche, we're gonna add that in. Like I said, if you had mascarpone, you could easily do that. And we're just gonna whisk this together. And this is what we look like now with our cheese and our creme fraiche. If at any point this gets too thick and more thick than you would like it to be, my suggestion is to add water, not milk or heavy cream, because that's gonna make it a little thicker and richer. So add a little bit of water to it to adjust the texture. So at this point, I'm gonna put this to the side. If you make this in advance, what I recommend you doing is taking parchment paper or plastic wrap or cling wrap, and you're gonna take your whisk out and you're gonna flatten this out to an even layer, and you're gonna put the parchment paper right on top of the polenta or the plastic wrap. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna create a seal, and it's gonna prevent a skin from forming on top of the polenta. And there's nothing wrong with the skin forming on the polenta, but what happens is it's just gonna make it challenging to reconstitute that when we go to plate it. So this is just gonna help to make it a little easier to serve when you're ready. So polenta's done. I'm gonna move on to my salmon. I have my pan. I'm using an all-clad saute pan. If you had a cast iron pan, that would be my recommended use. I use cast irons for everything. So we're gonna turn this up to like a medium-high heat. While that's getting hot, I'm gonna finish my apples so I can get that out of the way. My pan is getting hot. I have my oil. I'm using a grapeseed oil. Reason being is it has a higher smoke point than a traditional canola or vegetable oil. And so it actually has a little bit of flavor to it versus a vegetable or canola oil. So I like using grapeseed oil for cooking. Okay, so I have my salmon. So whether it be salmon, whether it be chicken breast, whether it be a steak, this technique I'm gonna show you how to cook this is really universally used and interchangeable. So first things first, it's gotta be dry. If you're gonna sear something and you wanna build up a crust and you wanna caramelize it, it's gotta be dry. So we always pat our fish and our meats down to make sure that they're dry. Another thing is we temper our proteins. What I mean by that is we wanna make sure that this cooks evenly and doesn't overcook on the outside while still staying cold inside. So if we were to take a piece of meat out of the refrigerator and put it right on the grill, it's gonna take much longer for the inside to come up to a proper temperature versus if we tempered it for say 30 to 45 minutes at room temperature where it was all one temperature. So we temper our meats. We also season aggressively. So I like to season from a high altitude. This is gonna be a 4-finger pinch. So like I said, we season pretty aggressively. We season high. Reason we season high is because you wanna get full coverage of surface area. If I came in here and I'm seasoning like this, you're only gonna get pockets of heavy seasoning, and that's not what we want. So we're gonna then turn over to our skin side, and we're gonna repeat. Seasoning high. And then I can tell my pan is ready. So I'm gonna go skin side down into my pan. And then once I put it into the pan, I'm not gonna touch it. I'm gonna let it be. So like I mentioned, this is a farm-raised salmon. So salmon, I feel like farm-raised seafood kind of got a bad rap towards the end of the 90s, early 2000s. And really, there's a lot of really good actors in the market right now for a good quality farm-raised salmon. And salmon is a seasonal fish for some specific hybrids and breeds of salmon. But for the most part, you can find farm-raised salmon year-round. And there's a lot of really good producers that are making farm-raised salmon around the world, whether it be in Chile, whether it be in New Zealand, Australia, up to Scotland and North Atlantic. So highly encourage it. I get all my seafood from my home and for Gravitas and Baker's Daughter from ProFish and Ivy City Smokehouse. So those are both across the street from Gravitas and Baker's Daughter. Ivy City Smokehouse is open to the public and allows you to buy restaurant quality seafood at a public market. So we're just gonna kind of let this sit. I can see now there's a little bit of color forming on the edge of my skin. That's a good sign. That's what we want. So at this point, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get ready to add in some thyme, garlic, and butter. And we're gonna add the butter in before we turn it over. Like I mentioned before, the butter is gonna, the milk solids of the butter are gonna caramelize, and it's going to allow the nuttiness of the butter to come out, and it's gonna impart a little bit of color in the skin and a nice sheen to the fish. So it smells great, right? You can smell the salmon fat coming out. I'm just gonna do a little sneak peek. And also, if the skin if it doesn't pull off when you go to touch it, it means it's not ready. It'll tell you when it's ready. It'll talk to you. Like that guy came off pretty good. So that skin is not quite where I want it. So I'm gonna give it a couple more seconds. Okay, so we're gonna add our butter now. This is a judge-free zone. It's a judge-free zone. Garlic and thyme go in here. If you wanted to omit the butter, you can. If you want to add the butter in, I highly encourage it. So I'm moving the butter around to make sure it's coating the fish. I'm turning my heat down now. And so what this caramelization of frothiness is what we're looking for. And now we're gonna turn our salmon over, and look at that skin. Look at that skin. Nice and crispy, I can feel it. So next step's gonna be basting it. So basting it is where we're gonna take this butter and we're gonna gently coat the salmon with this. And this is a learned technique. This is not something that comes naturally. So I'm gonna actually put the thyme and garlic on top of the fish. It's a way of kind of just like letting the flavors just drip through it. And so the motion is just like this on top of the salmon. And what that's gonna do is gonna help to create a sheen, help to add flavor and color. And then once you get good at it, you can then get a little faster with it and baste it a little more aggressively. But that sheen is really gorgeous. So we're gonna let that do its thing. This is gonna cook for about 30 more seconds before we turn the heat off. I feel confident from a touch that this is a fairly cooked, so I'm gonna probably turn my heat off in the next 10 seconds. But notice this salmon did not go in the oven. You could put it in the oven if you wanted to. I would say no longer than 60 seconds. For me, salmon needs to be medium rare inside. And medium rare to me on a fish is moist and light red to pink in the center. Not quite red, but light red to pink. So I'm gonna shave my red onion. That's gonna go into our salad. Nice thin julienne. That's gonna go into the salad. We are then going to clean our dill and our parsley. All right, so our dill, we already picked it off the stem a little bit. We're now just gonna pick this a little bit more, just into the little petals, little leaves. And we wanna be aggressive with the herbs. We wanna make sure that we're seasoning it pretty well and imparting a lot of flavor here. So we're gonna do the same thing with our parsley. I'm gonna do one more baste, just nice and gently. Okay, this is gonna come out. We're gonna rest this onto a towel. I'm gonna pour our butter into a side container, but I'm gonna keep my pan. I'm gonna turn my heat back up, medium high, and I'm gonna hit this with grain mustard, capers, and heavy cream. Okay, Dijon mustard, or sorry, whole grain mustard. You could use Dijon here if you like. Capers with the juice. You want to get that brine in there. We're going to move this around. We want to kind of open up the grain mustard. The idea is we're going to pull all this flavor from the salmon off the pan. If you had white wine, you could add white wine at this point. I'm just going to go heavy cream. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm gonna turn my heat down. Notice I'm stirring consistently. I don't want this to burn or get thickened anywhere. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of butter. We're gonna emulsify that in. Okay, heat's turned off. This is what the pan sauce should look like. This would be great with schnitzel. This would be great with some roasted carrots. Would be great on a piece of halibut or trout. I'm gonna taste for seasoning. I think I've done good. I think I've done good. At this point, we can plate up. I have my salad ready. The salad's gonna get dressed with Lindera Farms ramp vinegar. We sell a whole line of Lindera Farms vinegars at Baker's Daughter. This is a Virginia-made product. They have a raspberry vinegar, blackberry vinegar, strawberry vinegar, elderflower, wildflower, honey vinegar. They got it all. So we are going to dress our salad with the vinegar and then a little bit of grapeseed oil. We're gonna do the oil around the outside of the bowl so it doesn't weight down our salad. We're gonna season. Salt and pepper. And then our vinegar, we're just gonna put our thumb on top and it's gonna kind of go around the outside. For those of you all that are not familiar with ramps, this is a ramp vinegar. Ramps are kind of a newish trend, if you will, or a kind of a new age ingredient. And what it is it's in the green onion scallion family, and it grows wild, and it's now become a delicacy of a lot of restaurants all over the country, and it has a very short season, like a 4 to 6 week season for them, and we use them every time this comes into season. Chefs all over the country are in a hurry to try to snatch them up and try to maximize the use of them over that season. And so we pickle them, we make vinegars with them, we grill them and put them on dishes. And so this farm, Ladera Farms, has actually made a vinegar with them. So right now I'm just bringing my polenta back to life. If it dries out a little bit, you just have to add a little bit of water to it, like I mentioned. A little bit more water. All right, and our polenta's back. It's creamy, it's dreamy. I gotta taste it. You gotta taste everything. Use salt. Use pepper. All right, polenta is perfect. Okay, so to plate this, we're gonna do our polenta, kind of half on the plate, half down the middle of the plate, half on the side. About 2 spoonfuls. We are then going to take our pan sauce, and we're gonna go right to the left of the polenta, creating a base. And the fish is gonna go right on top of our pan sauce. Remember, this is a grain mustard, caper, butter sauce. We are gonna take our salmon that has been rested. Other thing that's important about the seafold or a paper towel, it drains the excess butter and fat and oil from the salmon. So it's not gonna run when it gets on the plate. And then we're gonna take our salad, and by hand, we're just gonna gently toss it together. We don't wanna put the sauce on top of the salmon because we just took our time with making a delicious crispy skin, and the sauce is gonna weight that down and make it soggy. And so we wanna put the sauce either below it or around the salmon. And so we're gonna start to build our salad here. We're gonna go half on the polenta, half perched on top of the salmon. And we are ready to serve this. Roasted salmon with a whipped polenta, shaved apple salad, whole grain caper sauce.
We tend to not think about olive as being a fruit because you think about like marinated olives, or you think about like heavy olive oil, or like it's in salads, but what it actually is like a very delicate, floral, fruity fruit, and you can make a beautiful cake out of it that is a really nice end to a meal, especially one like this, which might have like a lot of butter going on, a lot of like really nice indulgent qualities to it, and this is like a nice light dessert to finish it off. For this olive oil cake, I would suggest using a hand mixer or a KitchenAid if you have one, but I'm going to do it by hand with a whisk. A lot of cakes you're gonna see like creaming butter method, which is when you take your sugar and your butter and you cream them together. This recipe, I'm actually going to cream them together, but I'm going to do it with a whisk. And if you do happen to have a machine handy, it'll make it a lot easier and a lot faster for you. So it's gonna just take me a minute to get the butter and the sugar incorporated together, but it will happen. I would suggest using a really nice olive oil for this cake because you really want that real olive flavor to come through, whereas if you were gonna use like a blended olive oil or even like an extra virgin olive oil, they're not super olivey, even though that kind of sounds like backwards and weird. You really want like a heavier olive oil just so that you have that real like olive flavor, because you really want that to come through in the end of your cake. So I'm using my spatula here just to kind of like work the butter into the sugar first before I whisk it, just to make it easier for the actual whisk. You definitely want to have room temperature butter, just because we're using it with the whisk. If you were to do this with a whisk, it would take well, you might break your whisk first of all, or it would take a really long time. So you can see that like this butter is being worked into the sugar, which I would say it's pretty clear that this has been tempered, to use the kind of the word of the day, like we were tempering our proteins earlier, we're gonna temper our butter as well. I like to at home just like have butter out at room temperature. I don't know if that makes me weird or not, but like makes it easier for putting it on your toast. It makes it easier for dealing with when you're baking. So yeah, tempered butter, and then just working it into our sugar. I actually am going to also add the zest of a lemon to this. I know that's not in our recipe that we sent you guys with, but it's gonna add a little bit of like a flavor, a dimension to this cake that's gonna lift it up. Olive oil and citrus plays really well together, so even if you had like a blood orange or a regular orange at home, I would suggest putting the zest into this cake. It's gonna really like bring it to the next level, and it's good to do it at this point of our ingredients, because then you kind of get the oils from the citrus in your sugar and in your butter, and it's getting worked in along the whole process, and so you'll get more flavor extracted out of your actual zest. So I'm going to put in our first egg, and then I'm just going to whisk it in. I promise this will all come back together. It's going to look a little bit sketchy in the process, but it'll come back. Starting to look a little bit creamier, so you can see it's starting to come back together. Adding another egg in. Basically what's happening is the eggs are emulsifying with the butter and the sugar, which is the base of our cake. All right, we're getting a little bit smoother over here, a little bit creamier. That's kind of what we're looking for. I always teach people when they're making cakes or cookies, for the most part, you're gonna do eggs either one at a time or like 2 by 2. And you don't wanna throw all your eggs in at once, because you can run the risk of breaking or curdling, well, not curdling because we're not cooking it, but breaking your mixture, and then what happens is the end result, the crumb of your cake, like the structure of your cake, won't be as nice, or you might end up with like, if you've ever made a cake and you have like kind of weird like pock marks, or like it looks kind of inconsistent inside, that could be why. It's also nice to temper your eggs. That makes the process a little bit easier too, and it's less of a risk of also splitting your butter because everything's kind of at the same temperature. All right, so this is starting to look good. I'll show you guys this. This is after 3 eggs have been added, so you can see it's really smooth and like kind of a pale yellow, pretty like creamy consistency. At this point, I'm gonna emulsify in our olive oil. We have a blend that, or not a blend, but we have a nice olive oil that we use that is specifically made for us, but really any nice olive oil will do. My parents have like a nice blood orange olive oil at their house, and like that would be nice in this. If you have like a lemon olive oil, kind of like playing into that theme of like our citrus olive oil cake. When you put the olive oil in, you're gonna see it get a lot silkier looking. It's starting to look really pretty. Great, that looks good. And then at this point, I'm going to alternate our dries with our milk. So the reason that you want to do that is, again, kind of the whole thing where we're trying not to split the butter and then whatever you're incorporating it with. If you were to throw in all of that milk at once, it would definitely split your butter. And you could probably bring it back with the flour, but it's better to just avoid that in general. So I'm going to put in, let's say, 1/3 of our milk. Whisk that in. Yeah, so the milk should be room temperature. Everything tempered is best. If you were to, you could use cold milk, but like as a rule, just tempered is better. All right, and then 1/3 of our flour. By also not putting in all your flour at once, you're going to not have to deal with having lumps of flour in your batter. Less flour at once is better, because you're kind of like giving it a chance to marry into your wet ingredients without like gumming up into lumps. So then another 1/3 of the milk.
And you prefer the whisk method over folding?
Yeah, I whisk this one. If you're doing it in thirds, you're not really going to run the risk of over mixing your cake batter because you're not putting in your flour all at once. So the whisk is fine for this. Some cake batters I would fold if you were, really the folding method is if you're trying not to deflate a batter, but this batter is not one that like you have to worry about deflating. It's not like an egg foam batter. There's no meringue being like put into it. So like this is a pretty sturdy batter. You can use a whisk for it. All right, another third of our flour. So I misspoke. Extra virgin olive oil is good because it has more flavor. You want like a first press type olive oil. So that's the last of our flour, and then our cake batter is actually, oh, I'm sorry. I forgot the salt. We gotta add some salt. So this is like a 3 finger pinch of salt. It's important to season everything. 2 3 finger pinches of salt. That's about like 6 grams, or I would say like maybe if you like, I like salt, so I would say for this I would go with like a teaspoon of salt, but you could do like a half teaspoon if you were kind of watching your sodium levels. Okay, so cake batter's done. It's like nice, kind of thick and silky. It's the texture of magma. I always tell people look for that. It's like magma. That's good. That looks great. No lumps.
Do you think the average person sees with magma?
You can Google magma. Okay, so at home, if you had a 10-inch cake ring or like a 10-inch cake pan, this would be great for that. And for that, I would suggest buttering and or oiling and sugaring the sides. Either butter or flour on the edge are going to keep your cake from sticking.
Someone wants to know if you could add dried fruit or alcohol to this cake.
You could definitely add dried fruit. If you add alcohol, I wouldn't go too much because it will change it'll change the consistency of your batter. But what I would say is after this cake is baked, if you do like a little simple syrup, or if you do, I like to pour. I was going to get to that, but after it's baked, I like to drizzle it with olive oil. If you wanted to drizzle it with alcohol after it was baked, I would suggest that rather than adding it to the batter. Just so that you don't change the actual like texture of your cake. If you were gonna go alcohol on this, I would keep it something on the light side. So cake batter is done. This is what it looks like. So this is like a hotel pan. We have our the movie magic. So this is the one that I baked earlier today. This is what it's gonna look like. So I have already sort of saturated this with olive oil after it came out of the oven. Okay, so cake is done. I'm going to show you guys how to do like a traditional candied almond to garnish this with, and then we're gonna serve it with a little bit of creme fraiche. So keeping it simple. The candied almonds, I'm gonna use Marcona almonds. Those are a slightly higher, like more expensive almond. You can use any kind of almond. I think almonds and olives and lemons play really well together, so I would suggest that over any other nut, but you can kind of follow your heart. You can add your dried fruit to this, doesn't matter. My recipe for these almonds is 1-to-1. So 100% of your sugar is equal to 100% weight of your almonds. If you were gonna do this with imperial measurements, being cups and tablespoons, it's about a cup of sugar to about a cup and a half of almonds. So first thing you're gonna do is, and this is clean water. That's really important. If you're making like any sort of sugar candy or caramel or anything, it has to be clean water or you're gonna cause your sugar to crystallize. So I'm just going to create like a wet sand texture in the pan, and then I'm going to put it on the heat, and we're going to take it to about 106 Celsius. You can, if you add too much water, that's not a problem. It's just going to take longer for it to cook because the water has to evaporate out. Okay, so that's on the heat. It's going to take a minute to start boiling. I'm going to do this by eye. I suggest doing it the first couple times at home with a thermometer, and most probe thermometers that you can buy in a store, you can change them to Celsius, so the conversion's not actually super important. But so by eye, you're kind of looking for it to start boiling, and then you're looking for the bubbles in the sugar to become less rapid and kind of a mix of small and large bubbles. I'll try to show you guys what that looks like, but that might be a little difficult just because the camera angle. So yeah, it's gonna take a minute. I'm sure you guys know or have been harped on before by either me or somebody else close to you that cooks a lot that like sugar when you're caramelizing it is extremely hot, so please be careful, especially when you're cooking these. It's important that you use either a long-handled spatula or a long-handled metal spoon because even just like the steam from this is gonna be very, very hot. And basically when you get like cooking sugar on you, it's kind of a terrible gift that keeps on giving. It's gonna stick to your skin, it's gonna burn the crap out of you, just for lack of a better word. So try to avoid that. Yeah, so that's gonna take a minute. And I don't have any movie magic for these, so I'm actually gonna show you the whole process here. It does take a few minutes, but it's worth it. Traditional candy method makes like a really beautiful kind of like dark caramel, which I really like. It also toasts the nuts in the process. You don't have to do like toasted nuts first and then caramelize them. It's kind of like all in one process, so I prefer it this way. All right, so we're starting to boil. You can see like the steam is starting to rise. Right now it's just boiling in the middle. I have kind of become, like I prefer working on induction burners at this point just because like throughout my career it's it's almost faster than working on an open flame. But if you don't have an induction burner, I would cook this on high heat. And then like when you add the nuts, maybe reduce it to medium. All right, so we're starting to boil. You don't want to touch sugar as it's starting to boil. You can basically cause it to crystallize, which we are actually going to crystallize this, but not until we add our nuts. If you were to see kind of like almost a weird like layer of, I don't know how to explain what it looks like, but like a shell of sugar start forming over this, then you know your sugar is starting to crystallize, and those are bad sugar. That's like a bad sign. All right, we're getting there. We're starting to boil around the edges too. All right, so our sugar is now, I don't think you guys are gonna be able to see this, but you can kind of see the bubbles. It's all, yeah, sorry. It's basically the step right before it's gonna start coloring. So if you see your sugar starting to go kind of like blonde, that's a little step too far, but you can get your almonds in there and you'll still be fine. Okay, so the almonds are in, and now the name of the game is agitate. So we're gonna stir this for the entire process. And that's important because if you don't, you run the risk of like having it be inconsistently caramelized, or you can burn the almonds. When you do this and you're stirring, you're actually going to see your sugar crystallize before your eyes, and that is a good sign. Where you don't want that to happen, normally this is what we're looking for. So it almost looks like they're covered in like snow, or sugar, but like I always describe it as kind of, it's gonna look like it got like snowed on. And then this is actually called dragée. So you could stop this process now if you had already toasted your almonds and then you cooked it to this point. That's called dragée, and that's delicious, but you would just want to toast your almonds first because they're not going to get toasted in the pan. We're gonna keep cooking this because we want our sugar to caramelize, and that's just gonna be a couple more minutes. The sugar is going to start melting again. Okay, so the sugar is starting to melt, and the nuts are starting to toast. It's going to look a little inconsistent at the first part of the process, but that's fine. And I'm gonna kind of give the pan a little shake just to like evenly distribute the nuts on the bottom of the pan. Okay. So we're getting there. This does take a few minutes, but once it starts to happen, it happens really fast. So it's basically just the first part of the process that takes a few minutes. I'm gonna show you guys what this looks like really fast. So you can see that they are starting to melt. The bottom of the pan, the color of the caramel is starting to turn, and some of the nuts are toasted. So just keep stirring. You gotta kind of trust the process. I guess that's life, right? Trust the process. We're getting there. Kind of one of the signs that it's starting to be like getting into the process, you're gonna kind of hear your almonds start like popping, and as they're toasting, they're kind of like cracking. So that's one of the signs that it's getting there towards the end. I'm telling you, cooking is like about all 5 senses, it really is. And I'm gonna turn the heat down a little bit. Runaway induction burner also. Turning the heat down so I have more control. Thank you. A little more control over it at this point. Because the nuts are toasting, we just don't want them to go too far. The other thing about this is that it's a little bit dramatic. It's gonna start kind of like smoking. So it's gonna start smoking towards the end. If you have like a vent fan over, is it burning? Is it burning? When I do this in the kitchen, a lot of people are like, what's burning? What's burning? But it's not burning. It's just like the caramelization process. So the drama is there. And at this point, our nuts are basically, you could take this off if you wanted like a blonde candy, but I like a little bit darker. So I'm gonna take it a little bit further. You can, maybe you just heard that crack. Yeah, so a little bit further just because I like the nuts to be like toasted all the way through personally. Okay. You could even probably turn your burner off or turn off your heat at this point because it's going to carry over. All right. These are looking good. Yeah, so these are great. This is kind of like a dark honey color. I usually would go for like a step beyond this, but just this is good for today, I think. And then please be really careful when you take these out of the pan that you don't burn yourself. Again, if you were to get this on your skin, it's gonna really, really hurt and not be super easy to get off either. Okay. So there's our candied almonds. So trust the process, trust the process. Okay, and then I'm gonna season these, not super heavy, but just like a little bit of salt, a little bit, just to give it a little something, something. All right, and I'm just gonna put that on the induction burner for now. So these do take just, ouch, see, yeah, that's really hot. I'm just gonna take a couple of these off of here because if you put them on a cold surface, they will crystallize or they'll harden up really fast, and I just want to have them ready for just to show you guys how to plate them. Okay, so our cake, I'm gonna take that out like so. I'm gonna just cut off the edge. Personally, I just like the middle part better. Obviously you can cut this as big as you'd like it to or as small as you'd like it to. I'm gonna do like a nice square. Like so, like that. Okay, that looks great. And I would even probably, I already like saturated this with olive oil. I might even put more on it. You can kind of see on the top of the cake, like if you notice that line, that's all like, that's from where I soaked it with the olive oil earlier today. So I'll just put that right in our bowl. I'm gonna just move this out of our way, like so. If you wanted to make this cake gluten-free, you could use, I know Mom's makes a really good gluten-free flour that's like a cup for cup type deal. And there's one brand called Cup for Cup that you can just sub out like 1-to-1 cup of flour for a cup of this gluten-free flour, and it comes out the exact same. So creme fraiche, this is just straight up creme fraiche. So I'm gonna just mix it a little bit. But it's going to add some fat to this cake. This is not a fatty cake. There's not a lot of butter in it. There is olive oil, but olive oil is actually good for you. So creme fraiche is going to give it a little zing because it's acidic. and then it's going to give you a little bit of fat. So it's going to kind of do the same thing that you would think that ice cream would do for you, like that kind of like the desire for like to add fat to something, but that's not going to happen. But with creme fraiche, it's just going to give you also acidity, and then it's not necessarily like adding a cold, like a cold element, which you don't really need with this. And you know, I'm attempting a quenelle. That's not super easy with a flat spoon, but so bear, you know, don't judge me on my quenelle. Is that hot water? Oh God. Won't say you never did it.
Water was hot 35 minutes ago.
Won't say you never did anything for me. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have our little quenelle of creme fraiche, like so.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Thank you. It's all the water. And then I'm going to just chop our almonds really quickly. Let me see if I can show you guys. You can see here that the almonds are actually toasted through. I don't really care for like untoasted almonds. I think they just.
Are these Marcona?
Yes.
I love Marcona.
He loves Marcona.
I love Marcona almonds because of the fat content of the almonds. They're very rich, and just like Aisha was talking about with olive oil, for me, biting into a Marcona almond is like biting into like a nice oily nut, right?
Yeah.
No, I'd say butter. It's a very, very clean flavor, but it's very rich.
So, all right, that's our.
Mixed.
No. That's our olive oil cake with creme fraiche and candied almonds, and then I'm actually going to just drizzle a little bit of olive oil over it. Wow, I knew you had some subliminal thing you were going for. So that's what we've got here. This is the olive oil cake with creme fraiche and candied almonds.